Well, welcome again to TriPoint Church of God. It is my pleasure today to be able to fill in for Pastor Chris. He and Lori are ramping up at a marriage retreat this week, and so he asked that I would fill in for him, which is part of my job. So I said yes, and that's something I like to do, so I said yes. And I'm actually very excited to be here, to be able to have an opportunity to deliver this message. I do want to by way of announcement, I want to let you know that I have tendered my resignation with the board as the associate pastor here effective October 15th. And my family and I will be taking an extended trip out west this winter. We're going to try and sit winter out this year. And I'm not going to fall on any ice this year. I'm hoping that God will bless that. And He has given us an opportunity to do this. And so this may be the last time you'll be inflicted with me preaching in the near future anyways, but my hope is that next year I'll at least be able to return and fill in for Chris on the occasion and to be a part of worship on Sundays that he's not. And, you guys are our family. And so we love you, and we just have enjoyed being able to fill in this ministry right now for the time that God has given us, and I do appreciate all of the love and support that we have received in and through that. So, but we're looking at the marriage retreat that Chris and Lori are at is more than just a seminar for strengthening their marriage. It is a training and an opportunity for them to bring back some training principles and a training program that will be able to be utilized in the community. And so we're excited about the ministry that has set up. And it kind of gives me a topic to preach on today. So you're looking at the title there, I'm Third. You hear that screamed out on the playground all the time, right? It's lived out in our culture all the time in society today, right? Not really. Last week I had the blessing to officiate a wedding here locally, and I did share a part of this in the meditation, the I'm Third mindset, and that really marriage is predicated on that. So why is it so important that the church get marriage right? Well, primarily because historically the church isn't any better at marriage than the secular world is. We don't do well with it. And it's important because, first of all, marriage is something that was instituted by God at the very beginning. Of all the things that might have been in the Garden of Eden, do you realize that marriage is the one thing you can still possess today? Think about that. Is that something that's modeled in homes today? Paradise? When you think of marriage in our culture, is it expressed as Eden? Sadly, it's not. God created you. Christ came to model God's mind and heart for us so that we could get an understanding of a God who wants us to have a fulfilled and joyful life. And He created this institution of marriage as a model for it. In fact, it's the model that Christ used when He talked about the church. Over and over again, he referred to Himself as the bridegroom and the church as His bride. And if we don't understand the love that is supposed to be exemplified in and through marriage, how can we begin to understand the love of a God who has set aside everything to redeem us to Him? And so I want to spend some time on this idea or principle today because it is countercultural. In our world, it is me first. It is all about me. The old Burger King commercial. You can have it your way right away because you're number one. You're important. It's all about you. For almost 40 years, McDonald's mantra was, you deserve a break today. Because again, you're that important. It is all about you. And if that's not the mantra that we hear over and over again in our culture, at best what we hear is that I'm next. That was Meyer's campaign slogan for years. You're next in line because you're so important, we don't want you to wait a second. You've got so much going on in your life. You are so important that you need to get back into your life. You don't have time to step out of it. How many of you have used the grocery shopping services of places like Walmart now? You go on your smartphone, you throw in the things you want, you pull in, they run out and give it to you, you drive off. Because in our world, we think it's all about me. I am so important that nothing can get done without me. And Christ, he came along 2,000 years ago, and he kind of turned that mindset upside down. In fact, in Philippians 2, 6 through 11, we read that talking about Christ, who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God also has highly exalted him and given him a name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth, and that every tongue should confess Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. What Christ says, or what God says, is that by humbling himself, becoming the lowest and the least, he then becomes the exalted piece of everything. Everything on earth, everything above earth, everything below earth. There's nothing that doesn't exalt him in the end. But if you think we have a hard time getting our heads around it today, there's people that walk with Christ that never got it. In fact, Jesus was walking with his disciples in Matthew 20, and he tells a story. He says, you know, the kingdom of heaven is like this. It's like a kingdom. It's like a farmer that owns a field, and he goes out and he hires people. At the beginning of the day, he goes out and hires and says, hey, you work today, I'll give you a day's wage. And they thought, cool. They get in the field, and they start, and they work it all day long. Throughout the day, though, he keeps hiring more and more people and bringing them in. He just tells them, come work in the field, I'll pay you. It'll be fair. Okay. At the end of the day, he lines them up, and he goes to pay them. The guys who are there all day long, they get their wage, and it's the first guys that got there just the last minutes, they got a full day's pay. And everybody's all excited. Wow, these guys worked 2 minutes, and they got all day pay. I've been here all day, and as it goes online, they're all getting the same pay. And now they're all getting mad. Like, they don't get it. And Jesus is telling them, you're mad. Who are you to say what I do with my money? But understand this. It's not about you. I've done what's fair. I've did exactly what I said I would give to you. He's telling me, you want to be first, be last. Just put yourself down a little bit. Don't worry about how important you are. And he gets all done with this parable, and he starts walking by, and James and John, two of his disciples, the sons of thunder, he called them, the sons of Zebedee. There's these zealous go-getter guys that are in his group. They have a response to Jesus' story about who's getting paid and how it's going to work out. He said, hey, when you come in, Jesus tells them about his death that's going to happen, his crucifixion, and then they say, hey, when you come into your kingdom, can I be first? Can I sit at your right hand? And can my brother sit at your left hand? Can we be the next ones? No, at least they understood they couldn't be Christ, right? But then I thought, well, if I can't be him, I can be like right next to him. Get me on the right and left. And Jesus was like, you still don't get it. It's not about you. He said, if you want to be great, be a servant. He said, if you want to be top dog, be a slave. He says, even as the Son of Man came not to serve, or to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. See, the I'm third mindset takes us back a little bit. It says it's not about me. I'm not first. I'm not second. I need to be last. I need to put everybody else in front of us. This is what makes God God and us not. God's first thought is always for someone else. Typically, our first thought is always for myself. In marriage, the I'm third principle looks like this. Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Died for her. A horrible, painful death. Talk to guys all the time that are bemoaning everything that their wife is not doing for them. Everything that's not happening in their favor at home. And they're like, how can that be? And I'm like, well, what should I do? I said, you better start dying. I don't know what to tell you. That's what the book says. But give it up. It's not about you. The day you said, I do, is the day you said, you know what? You are so important that you come first. You get moved to the front of the line because that's how much I care about you. The person that first modeled this for me in my life was my dad. I come along later in his life. I was the bottom rung of his slew of kids. And my dad, he was kind of, I was raised in kind of a weird family. My parents weren't saints. They were godly people. They were God-fearing people. They made mistakes. They did some things that probably weren't all that great. My daughter's heard some of the stories, and she's like, wow, your parents were mean. I said, well, sometimes my mom could be mean. My dad could be. They weren't perfect people, but they loved God. My dad modeled this I'm third mindset. My dad was born in 1921. So I was 46, or he was 46 years old when I was born. Which is why just a couple years ago I've started seeing my dad look out of the mirror at me. Because I'm the age now that he was that I remember as a kid, if that makes sense. My dad, he had to me, he had an amazing life. To him, it was a life of hardship forever. He was born in 21, so he was 8 years old when the stock market crashed, and he grew up in an orphanage during the Great Depression, and back then, in the orphans, they would farm them out literally to farms as labor. And so they would be, we would call it, boy, I don't want to use that word, foster, but back then, what that meant was that you would just, they need 5, 6 strong boys to come get some work done. They'd go to the orphanage and pick them up, and then the orphanage wouldn't be responsible for feeding them during that time, and they could just be farmed out. And some of the places my dad worked, they weren't very nice to him. It was a tough labor for him. The one event that finally ended it all, he was about 12 years old. The guy he was working for didn't like the way he was walking out the barn, and so he buried the pitchfork in his back to kind of prod him along, literally speared him with it, and he got up from that and walked the 26 miles from where the farm was to Millington, where his older brother lived, and Cliff said, that's enough, you guys are going to come live here, and we'll figure out how we're going to make it work. And so they went through all of that. My dad then went into World War II. He spent 5 years overseas during that time, and of course his recounting of that is always humorous. You could ask Dad about his wartime experience, and really all you'd get is, they put us on a boat and we went over to Africa. We walked across Africa, and this is my dad's history lesson for you. It's great. You walked across Africa, they put us on a boat, we went to Sicily. We walked across Sicily, they put us on a boat, we went to Italy. We walked across Italy. Eventually, after about 8 months, they put us on a boat and brought us back home. He said, when I saw the Statue of Liberty, I cried like a baby. It's the first time I've seen American soil in over 5 years. And he come back. I'm grateful that he came back. He got married, and he started a baby boom that lasted 20 years, which is how I wound up at the bottom rung of his. My parents birthed 9 kids. They raised 8. They buried 1 along the way, and all of my life, growing up, my dad modeled, I'm third. Blows your mind when you think about it. Somebody that's willing to set aside their first priority is somebody else. You know people in your life like that? Have you modeled that in your life at times? That is a huge accomplishment if you can get to a point in your life where you can say, somebody else is more important than me. Well, there's 4 basic principles I want to talk to you about today about the I'm third mindset. The first principle is that the I'm third mindset is modeled by somebody who suffers silently. Reading the devotion this week, 1 Peter 2, verses 19 through 23, says that for this is thankworthy if a man for conscience toward God endures grief, suffering wrongfully. If, when you do well and suffer for it, yet take it patiently, this is acceptable with God. For even hereunto were you called, because Jesus also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. Who, when he was reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not. What Peter's saying is it's more than just modeling your life after the old mantra of what would Jesus do. In the context of this, he is the primary example of what to do in a situation where you're suffering. To follow Christ's example is to be willing to endure unjustified suffering. Even if it's something that just tears you down, even if it's persecution. We are called to endure it with grace and patience. That's tough. The devotion I was reading says it goes even a step farther than that. It says it's not just to suffer it with grace and patience, but to do it silently. Talking again about Jesus in the prophecy, Isaiah 53:7, as sheep before shears is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. That's something that as a church we don't like that. As Americans, we want justice. We want things to be right. We want things to be the way they ought to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what Christ is saying that if you want to model the I'm third mentality, the mindset, you got to be willing to take your lumps and be okay with it. In Colossians 1:11, Paul is writing to a church at Colossae, and he's telling them, he's addressing a lot of things, but one of the things that he wants to get to them in verse 11, he says that I am praying for you daily that you will be strengthened with all might according to God's power unto all patience and long-suffering with joyfulness. And the word that's long-suffering there is translated more accurately as forbearing. Forbearing the offenses that others have placed on you wrongfully. To be willing to accept that. In John Bevere's book, The Bait of Satan, he spends the whole book is talking about this, what he calls the bait of Satan. And basically what he's saying, the bait of Satan is this, that it's taking offense. It's being offended. And he's talking in the church, people that are taking offense within the church over something somebody else within the church has said or done. And it's an unwillingness to be forgiving of all of that. If you're watching the giving video, you will have seen part of this in there. Luke 6, chapter 6, verse 27 starts out that, but Jesus again talking to his followers that have gathered around him. But I say unto you that here, love your enemies. Do good to them that hate you. Bless them that curse you, and pray for them that despitefully use you. To him who smites you on one cheek, offer the other. And to him that takes away your cloak, do not forbid him to take your coat also. Give to everyone that asks of you. And of him that takes away from you your goods, don't ask for them to be returned. And as you would that men should do to you, do to them likewise. He goes on to say, because if you love those who love you, what thank have you? The heathens even do this. And if you're good to them who are good to you, again, what thank have you? For sinners also do the same. And if you lend to them of whom you hope to receive, what thank have you? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies and do good and lend, hoping for nothing to be returned. And your reward will be great, and you shall be the children of the highest, for he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. Be you therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Jesus is telling his followers is that there's a new standard to live by. It's not about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth anymore. That's not the way God lives. So often we think God is this person who's just waiting to smack you down. But he's not. He's this guy that's waiting to build you up, to lift you out of whatever you're in, to go to any length to bring you into his presence. And he says that we are to be merciful in the same manner to other people. That we're to lay it all down. That when we're wronged, we need to suffer through it silently. Next, he says that the person that exhibits the I'm third mindset labors ceaselessly, vigorously, tirelessly. You ever worked for that guy? I always said, don't ever take a job working for a guy that can outwork you. You're in for a long haul when that happens. Because there are people that are there, but that's what we're called to do. In Colossians 3:23, Paul writes that whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Doesn't matter what you're doing. Paul says, whatever it is, put your whole heart into it and work at it ceaselessly. Again, my dad modeled this for me. 47 and a half years he went to work at General Motors. He was known as a guy that was never late and never missed work. Well, he did miss a few days. When his appendix burst, he took a day off. And when he had pancreatitis, he took 3 days off. But when a shipping container was dropped on his feet at work, I remember him laying on the couch with his feet propped up, and he'd roll off and crawl to the bathroom and get ready for work, and he'd crawl out the door and climb into the car with his ride, and off they'd go to work. And he took on a second job roofing houses just to get some occupational rehabilitation into his feet so that he could walk again. They don't make them like that anymore. Nowadays, if you can get them to show up 3 out of 7 work shifts, you're doing good. If you can get a half day's work out of them in 7, they're a rock star employee. Give them a pay raise and a promotion. But that's not what we're called to do. We are called to, the I'm third mindset says that I'm putting everything I have into this moment. Not because it's to me or to my family or to my employer, but because it's to Christ that I'm working. I'm laying it on the line. In Ecclesiastes 9:10, it says, whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it with your whole might. Do it all the way. The I'm third mindset suffers silently, it works tirelessly, and it puts others ahead of themselves. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul is writing a whole big dissertation on what love is and what love isn't. And it comes down to this. He says, love does not seek its own. If you love someone, you don't seek out your own benefit. In that whole chapter, Paul treats love not as a feeling. I always tell people in marriage counseling that or premarital counseling that we do, or in the wedding itself, love is not a pit you fall into, and it's not a tree you fall out of. It's not a feeling at all. It is a choice, Paul says. If you choose to love someone, what you're saying is that you are more important than me. You come first. Your desires, your happiness, your wants come ahead of mine. It's not, I get mine, and then if there's anything left, we'll take care of you. Others come ahead of yourself. People who exhibit the I'm third mindset are the last ones to get off the elevator. They're the ones to stop and hold the door open for you to go in. They're the ones that make four-way stops a nightmare because they won't go. It's been their turn 6 times and they're still sitting there. But that's what we're called to do. To put others ahead of ourselves, to elevate others more highly than us. Christ modeled this for us. On the night he was betrayed, he spent time with his disciples, and in the midst of the dinner, he gets up, takes off his cloak, washes their feet. Understanding that is like the dirty job. One of my first jobs when I was in high school was cleaning sewers. We used to maintain the sewer lines for townships, and our T-shirts actually said, get your mind out of the gutter, come on down to the sewer with us. It was a wonderful job. This is what foot washing was back then, okay? It's like the lowest of lowest jobs. It's dirty. It stinks. It's nasty. And Jesus says, that's what we're modeling. That's what I'm doing for you. And as I have done for you, he says, do for others. Because again, it's not about your station. It's not about how important you are. It's not about where you're at. It's about your heart and how you treat others. Jesus said, this is how people will know that you're my disciple, by the love that you have for one another. And lastly, the person who exhibits the I'm third mindset puts God first. The first 3 commandments deal with our relationship with God. That you're to have no gods before me, that you're to have no idols, and that you're to remember the Sabbath. Keep it holy. Set aside time for God. God says that if you are going to be on my team, I need to be the head of it. I need to be the first thought that enters your mind. People ask you who you are. Your first response should be, I'm a child of God. And everything I think, say, and do in life is filtered through the prism of what God would want me to do in this moment. I'm a child of God. I am completely surrendered to the rule and the reign of him in my life. Tough order, tough act to follow. Jesus surrendering everything to follow God. Saying, I don't want to be here, but I'll do it if I have to. And thank God that he did. Because it gives us an opportunity to step into that model and to follow it. Do we get it right all the time? I don't. But the bar is set to strive for it. God first. Proverbs 9:10 says, the fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom. If you don't fear and know who God is, you don't have a hope. This is what the book says about being wise. Because the beginning of all wisdom is the fear of the Lord. But Psalm 14:1 says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. So my challenge for you this week is that each moment, ask yourself, foolish or wise? Am I fearing God? And when I say fear God, I want you to understand, I'm talking about being in awe of somebody who has created everything that is, surrendered it all to die for you so that you could enter into his presence. That's fearing the Lord. I'm not talking about trembling, oh no, he's going to strike me down because I said or did or I goofed up. No. But each moment, am I living my life in fear of the Lord? Am I surrendering to the understanding that there's a God in heaven who cares about me? Or am I living foolishly? Have I forgotten there's a God? Have I decided that, you know what, in this circumstance, there is no God. He don't care about this moment. Let me tell you, he cares about every moment. He cares about every person. He cares about everything you think, say, and do. Because he wants people to understand who he is. And you're the picture that's going to make that happen. When you put on the mindset of I'm third. And say, I'm not living this life for me. I'm living it for others. I'm not first. God's first. I don't care what so-and-so said to me or did to me or whatever. I'm giving it up. I have prayed the Lord's Prayer, and I have asked to be forgiven as I forgive those who sin against me. And if I'm not willing to forgive those who sin against me, what am I asking God to do? Treat me the same way I treat other people. So I want to get that right. And I want to say that whatever happens in my life, I can trust that God is there with me and that he's going to carry me through to the next moment and the next one after that. And so again, my challenge is just ask yourself, wise? Is God real or foolish? Does he not exist? And live to serve others so that the world will know why we set aside time to do this every week, why we live out a life that is surrendered to the King of Kings who has laid it all on the line for each one of us. Amen. Loving God, we do come before you again, as always, thankful that you have placed in our hearts a desire to know you and that you have created a way for us to do that. And so we surrender ourselves to you, Lord, and ask that you lead and guide in all that we do this week. In the name of Christ.